Okay, it's Friday after the election, so it's almost been a full week, and now it's time to have a bit of a reflection on what's occurred. I've got to say, I'm getting mixed signals here. I've been watching a little bit of Sky News. There was actually an interview with a national, I'm pretty sure it was a National Party female senator, and they were talking about coal-fired power stations, and what worried me was that she just kept talking about doing a feasibility study on it. Well, I think, well, bugger that. We've had plenty of time to think about the coal-fired power station in Northern Australia. Just build the bloody thing. They've had more than enough time to do a feasibility study. I'm extremely suspicious that this is just a delaying tactic. Now, I'm hoping that this is not what we're going to get after Scott Morrison won himself a decent mandate after the election. I'm getting more hopeful signs from him. It looks like he's actually starting to take on the bureaucracy, which I think is way overdue. The Canberra bureaucracy has been strangling a lot of initiative in this country for years, and it's got far too big and bloated and inefficient. And I think it's time it's brought to task. Personally, I think there's lots of room for downsizing in the public service and making sure it's more efficient. I'm hoping that message gets through to Scott Morrison. That's got to be one of the top priorities, but more important than that is really getting these infrastructure programs, such as building coal-fired power stations and dams in this part of the world, in regional Queensland. After all, we basically gave the Liberals the election in effect, and it might be a little bit of time for a bit of payback. I think this part of the world could really go ahead if we had plenty more water resources plus cheap power. It could really open up the area. So I think it's a smart move. I'm retired, so it's not going to affect me directly, but anyone looking for employment is going to be quite happy about that situation. So I think it's time they get their asses into gear. But like I say, Scott Morrison has been saying positive things, but I was a bit worried about that national senator who was being interviewed on Sky, and just to me that was just delaying and type tactics, talking about waiting for a feasibility study to be completed before they do anything. It's just look, it takes 5 years, I think, to actually build a power station and get it online. So we haven't got the luxury of waiting. We're decommissioning too many of these coal-fired power stations already, and we've got a very dodgy grid now. The electricity grid is fragile the way it is, and unless there's some incredible breakthrough with battery technology, and until they do, then renewable energy is not the solution. Plus the fact that I would contend that it's not as cheap as coal-fired power. I think basically our best solution is going to be in the area of hydro. That is known to be quite a cheap source of renewable energy if you want to go that way. But we also are going to need to look at the nuclear option. And it'd be nice if we had fusion power, but we don't. But we do at least still have fission reactors that are much more efficient than they used to be and safer than they used to be. And we would be crazy with all the uranium we have in this part of the world not to actually take advantage of that particular resource as well. Australia should be a very low cost energy producer and user, and it isn't. They are actually, Liberals are looking at doing something about the cost of gas in this country, which is totally ridiculous, because there was no foresight with government. They didn't provision for our own use. They just basically wanted to get all the money they could from exporting the resource. Now we've got none of our own at a cheap price, and that's insane. So that's going to be redressed. So that's good. I am overall optimistic about what's going to happen in the country after the election. I think it was good to see what happened in the Hunter Valley, where a One Nation candidate almost got in because of such disillusion with the Labor candidate being anti-coal. I mean, that's insane. Well, I don't know if he specifically was anti-coal, but certainly the Labor Party has been very anti-coal, and he represented that party, so he paid a big price. And I think the message is finally getting through. I don't expect the Labor Party to reform themselves in the short term. They may in the long term. Maybe they'll have to lose another election to work that one out. But the Liberals can certainly make a few tough decisions. The other area I want to see reform big time is education. We've got to do something about the propaganda that's being portrayed in the state schools system and also at university levels. It's just not good enough that government money is going into paying for this propaganda. And speaking of propaganda, the ABC itself also needs to have its funding radically slashed. It certainly has done no favours to any Conservative party in Australia, and it's time for them to have a big reality check. Ida Buttrose, it sounds like a good move in control of the ABC, but we've had people like that in the past who have had senior positions, and they still can't turn around that oil tanker, which is the ABC. It's like a gigantic ship that is, the momentum's there, and it's almost impossible to turn it around. So I think the only way to get the message across to that organisation is to slash the funding. And why are we funding an organisation that's basically providing similar material to what commercial stations are anyway, and online as well? There's plenty of options these days. Do we really need a bloated ABC? I would like to see the money used for investigative reporting. That's an area that isn't being looked after by private companies, but it's something that maybe a government organisation should look into. It's not sexy, but it's something that needs to be done if you want to have a vibrant democracy and have good journalism, which we're not getting from the ABC at the moment. I think that's where the priorities should be. I think we could save so much money by having an inquiry into the Australian Public Service and streamline the way it works to make investment in the country a lot easier. And because we're going to have a pretty rough time in the next couple of years with the property slump, which could well get a lot worse when these no interest loans come due. Then you might get a lot because when the honeymoon period finishes with the no interest loans, then all of a sudden the borrower has to start paying off the principal as well as the interest, and that's when you'll have a lot of defaults. And Martin North, who's very up with what's happening in the property market, has said that there's something like a 5-year delay before the actual loans, between when the loan's taken out and when these defaults start filtering through. So this pain could be with us for some time to come, and it's going to be a rolling amount of defaults in the housing market. So we're not going to get out of this situation for some time. So we need to be very smart in other areas of the economy to make sure that we get through this rough patch. And I'm just hoping that I do have hope that Scott Morrison will be able to do the right thing. He seems to have a bit of common sense, which is quite lacking in most politicians. So that's good news. Oh, and also another tidbit about Carly Stagel. She used to have before the election, she had advertising hoardings being driven around by a Hummer, no less. Mobile advertising pulled by a gas-guzzling Hummer. The woman is a total hypocrite, and I hope the electors in her electorate discover that over the journey and give her what she deserves when the next election comes around. I think they've been totally conned. Hopefully things are going to get better. It looks as though Scott Morrison's going to have at least a few extra seats to play with. He's got a pretty comfortable majority now, and he's going to find it a little easier to deal at the Senate because there's also a lot less cross parties to negotiate with. So it should be a lot easier for him. Oh, plus the fact he also got rid of all those wets from the Liberal Party, including the likes of Julia Banks. Those people have gone. Julie Bishop is gone. It's looking a lot better for them. And Chris Pine, I mean, who could forget Chris Pine? Everybody'd love to forget Chris Pine. Oh, I hope they do something about that contract. Speaking of Chris Pine, for those that ridiculous contract for the submarines, that's another millstone around the neck financially. It's got I think it's around $50 billion or something ridiculous for outdated technology. Something has got to be done with that as well. But in the meantime, I'd just be happy if we actually saw a commitment to building a coal-fired power station up here in northern Queensland and elsewhere in Australia as well, because we're going to need them until we have cheap, renewable, reliable electricity as an alternative, and it ain't there yet. Please consider subscribing to my channel if you think there's anything there of use to you or entertainment or whatever. And either do that or give me a thumbs up, or if you're feeling really energetic, do both. That'd be great. But please don't ignore me. That's the worst thing you can do on YouTube, is be ignored.